The glass door chimed as Victor Carbone pushed it open, and the scent of vanilla and warm sugar hit him immediately. He paused, one polished Italian leather shoe inside the bakery, the other still on the cracked Brooklyn sidewalk. His men waited by the black armored SUV, hands hovering near their concealed weapons, confused. In 15 years of running one of the most powerful crime families in New York, Victor had never personally chosen anything for his weddings, his meetings, his underground operations. But today, something had pulled him here, something he couldn't name. The bakery was small, too small for a man who controlled half of Brooklyn's shadows. The walls were cream-colored, lined with photos of smiling customers and handwritten thank you notes. A chalkboard menu hung crookedly near the register. Soft jazz played from an old speaker somewhere, and then he saw her. She stood behind the counter, her back to him, tying an apron around her waist. Her chestnut hair was pulled into a messy bun, shorter than he remembered. Her frame was thinner now, almost fragile, and faded bruises marked her wrists from years of exhausting labor. She turned, reaching for something on the shelf, and Victor's breath stopped. Amelia. She hadn't noticed him yet. She was humming softly, completely absorbed in arranging pastries in the display case. Victor's hand tightened on the door handle, his knuckles turning white. 5 years. It had been 5 years since she vanished from his life without explanation, without a trace, without a single word. After he woke up to an empty apartment and a diamond ring left on the pillow, he should leave. He should turn around, get back in the car, and have Marco order the wedding cake online like any man in his position would, but his feet wouldn't move. Then Amelia looked up. Their eyes met across the small space, and Victor watched the color drain from her face. The small notepad in her hand slipped, hitting the counter with a soft thud. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. Before he could speak, before he could form words around the shock lodged in his throat, a child's voice rang out from the back room. Small feet pounded against the worn wooden floor, and a little boy burst through the doorway behind the counter, a crayon drawing clutched in his tiny hands. "Mommy, Mommy," I finished the picture. The child couldn't have been more than 4 years old. He wore a faded blue shirt with a dinosaur on it, his brown hair messy and wild, but it was his eyes that made Victor's world tilt violently on its axis. Gray, cold, sharp like steel, unmistakably his. The little boy stopped when he noticed the stranger in his mother's bakery. He pressed closer to Amelia's leg, suddenly shy, peeking out at Victor with curious eyes that reflected his own face back at him. Victor Carbone, the most ruthless mafia boss in New York, the man who had ordered deaths without flinching, stood frozen in a tiny Brooklyn bakery, staring at a 4-year-old boy who had his eyes, his jaw, his blood, and everything he thought he knew about the past 5 years, shattered into a million pieces. If you made it this far, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a like if you want to see Victor confront the truth. Share this with someone who loves a good mafia story. Now, let us go back to the life of Victor Carbone, 5 years ago, when he first laid eyes on a girl named Amelia Weston. 6 years ago, Victor Carbone walked into the small bar on the corner of Mulberry Street not because he wanted a drink. He was there to collect protection money from a bar owner who had been late for 3 consecutive months. The place was shabby, washed in dim yellow light, the air thick with the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke clinging together. Marco followed a step behind him, one hand resting on the gun hidden beneath his suit jacket. But the moment Victor sat down at the corner of the bar, everything changed. A young woman stepped out from the back, a tray of drinks balanced in her hands, chestnut brown hair tied up in a hurried knot, with loose strands falling across her forehead. She wore an old white shirt and a black apron, her frame slender but her movements quick and sure. She didn't see Victor sitting in the shadowed corner. She turned too fast, and the entire tray of whiskey crashed down onto his $3,000 suit. The liquor soaked into the fabric, the sharp scent of alcohol rising instantly. Marco shot to his feet, his hand reaching inside his jacket. The whole bar fell silent. The owner rushed out from the back, his face drained of color, stammering apologies over and over again. But the girl didn't. She stood there, looking Victor straight in the eye without a trace of fear. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice strangely calm. "But if you weren't sitting hidden away like that, I would have seen you." Victor had never met anyone who dared to speak to him like that. He was Victor Carbone. People trembled when they heard his name. They lowered their heads when he entered a room. Yet this girl, with her clear green eyes and an apron soaked in spilled liquor, looked at him as if he were nothing more than an ordinary customer standing in her way. "Do you know who he is?" Marco snarled. "Your boss is about to lose this entire bar because of you." The girl glanced at Marco, then looked back at Victor. "I don't care who he is. I'm just a waitress. I spilled the drink. I apologized. If he wants to fire me, that's fine, but I won't kneel down and beg anyone." Victor watched her, something unfamiliar rising in his chest. He had met hundreds of women, the most beautiful, the most powerful, the wealthiest. They all wanted him, wanted his money, wanted his power. They smiled sweetly, spoke honeyed words, willing to do anything for his attention. But this girl was different. She didn't know who he was, and even if she did, she probably wouldn't care. In those green eyes, Victor saw no fear and no greed. He saw the pride of someone who had nothing left to lose. "What's your name?" Victor asked, his voice softening without him meaning it to. The girl raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. Amelia Weston. And who are you that this whole bar is scared of you like you're a tiger?" Victor smiled, for the first time in many years, a real smile. "It doesn't matter. You owe me a suit, Amelia. I'll come back to collect." He stood, walked out of the bar, leaving Marco staring in disbelief and the owner breathing a shaky sigh of relief. On the way back, Marco asked if he wanted to burn the place down. Victor shook his head. "No, leave it. I'll be back." And he was. The next day, the day after that, and every day after for 3 straight weeks. He sat in the corner of the bar, ordered a glass of whiskey he never drank, just to watch the brown-haired girl move between the worn tables, smiling at customers but never once at him. Amelia Weston didn't know that the man sitting in the corner every night was the most feared Mafia boss in New York. She only knew that he watched her with a strange look in his eyes, and it made her uncomfortable. And Victor Carbone, for the first time in his life, didn't know how to conquer a woman. Because she didn't want his money, didn't want his power, didn't want anything he could offer. She only wanted him to leave the bar and let her be. Victor didn't give up. He was a man who had never accepted refusal, whether it came from business rivals, enemies, or a stubborn waitress. In the 4th week, he began leaving tips 10 times the size of the bill. Amelia returned every single dollar. In the 5th week, he sent flowers to the bar. Amelia gave them all away to the customers. In the 6th week, he bought the entire bar and erased the former owner's debt, simply to make sure Amelia wouldn't be fired for turning him down too many times. When Amelia found out, she came to him after her shift, her green eyes burning with anger. "Do you think you can buy me?" she asked, her voice trembling with fury. "Do you think because you have money I'll fall into your arms like every other woman? I know who you are now. Victor Carbone. This whole neighborhood knows. You're a killer, a mafia boss, the darkness everyone is afraid of. I'd rather starve than have anything to do with you." Victor stood there, for the first time in his life not knowing what to say. He was used to people fearing him, hating him, or trying to use him. But he wasn't used to a woman looking him straight in the eye and saying she'd rather die than be with him. That night, Victor couldn't sleep. He sat in his luxurious penthouse overlooking New York City, thinking about the girl with green eyes and unbreakable pride. He thought about her words, about how she was right. He was a killer. He was the darkness. He didn't deserve a clean soul like Amelia Weston. But Victor Carbone didn't know how to let go. He only knew how to pursue. He stopped sending flowers, stopped leaving tips, stopped every grand gesture. Instead, he came to the bar every night, sat in his usual corner, ordered a glass of whiskey, and read. He didn't look at Amelia, didn't speak to her, didn't do anything at all. He was just there, quietly, as if his presence were the most ordinary thing in the world. A month passed. Amelia began to grow curious. She glanced at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. She saw him reading books about history, philosophy, art. She saw him smile when an elderly couple danced slowly to a jazz song. She saw him drop money into the charity box by the register every time he left. She began to see a different Victor Carbone, not the cold mafia boss people whispered about, but a lonely man trying to prove he wasn't only darkness. One rainy night, the bar nearly empty, Amelia sat down across from Victor. She didn't say anything, just looked at him. Victor looked back. They sat like that for 10 minutes in silence. Then Amelia asked, her voice soft as breath, "Why don't you give up?" Victor closed his book and looked deeply into her green eyes. "Because I've never met anyone who made me want to be a better man. Not until I met you. That night, They talked until the bar closed. Victor told her about a childhood without a father, about a cold mother, about being pushed into the underworld while he was still a teenager. Amelia told him about the orphanage, about years of abuse, about her dream of opening a small bakery. They were two people from different worlds, yet each carried scars no one could see. Their love began that night. Secret, dangerous, forbidden. Victor rented a small apartment in Brooklyn, far from his Mafia empire, far from watching eyes. They met there, in the late hours when the city was asleep. Amelia taught Victor how to bake. Victor taught Amelia how to dance. They laughed, they cried, they loved each other as if tomorrow didn't exist. A year passed like a dream, and on a winter night, as snow fell white outside the window, Victor knelt before Amelia, a diamond ring in his hand. He wanted to marry her. He wanted her to be his wife, in front of the entire world, no matter the consequences. Amelia cried, nodded, and the ring slid onto her finger. They didn't know their happiness was being watched. They didn't know the darkness was lurking just outside the door of that small apartment. And they didn't know that the most powerful woman in the Carbone family knew everything, and she would never allow her son to marry a nameless orphan girl. Catherine Carbone never allowed anything to happen within her empire without her knowing. She had spies everywhere, in every corner of New York, in every shadowed crevice of the underworld. When her son began disappearing late at night, when he started smiling for no reason, when his gaze softened in a way she had never seen before, she knew something was wrong. She ordered Victor to be followed. What they reported back left her choking with rage. Her son, the heir to the Carbone Empire, the most powerful mafia boss in New York, was in love with a waitress from a cheap bar. She stared at the secret photographs. Victor and Amelia walking through a park. Victor kissing Amelia's forehead outside a small apartment. Victor kneeling to propose with a diamond ring in his hand. She smashed her wine glass against the floor, shards of glass scattering everywhere. This was an insult. This was a humiliation for the entire Carbone bloodline. Catherine immediately ordered an investigation into Amelia Weston. Within 48 hours, a thick report was placed on her desk. She read every page, and each one filled her with deeper disgust. Amelia Weston, born in a public hospital in Queens. Mother, a drug-addicted prostitute. Father unknown. Her mother died of an overdose when Amelia was only 3 years old. She was sent to St. Mary Orphanage, where she spent the next 15 years. Records showed she had been abused by one of the administrators, the scars on her back standing as proof. She left the orphanage at 18 with nothing. No education, no family, no future. She worked whatever jobs she could to survive. Washing dishes, scrubbing floors, waiting tables, cleaning toilets. She was nobody. She was nothing. And her son wanted to marry this girl. Catherine stood by the window, looking down at the city, her eyes cold as ice. She had spent her entire life building this empire. She had endured an abusive husband, survived wars between families, sacrificed everything to raise her son to the pinnacle of power, and now Victor wanted to throw it all away for a worthless orphan girl from an institution. She wouldn't allow it. Catherine called her most trusted people. She had a perfect plan. That Amelia girl would disappear, and Victor would never know what had happened. But before acting, she wanted to see with her own eyes the one who had dared to enchant her son. She wanted to know exactly what kind of person she was dealing with. A week later, Catherine appeared at the bar where Amelia worked. She wore an elegant black dress, a priceless pearl necklace, stepping into the shabby bar like a queen entering a slum. Amelia was wiping down a table when Catherine sat down. She looked up and offered a polite smile. The same she gave every customer. "Would you like to order something?" Catherine looked her up and down with open contempt. She noticed the diamond ring on Amelia's finger, the ring her son had bought, and fury ignited inside her. "You are Amelia Weston," Catherine said. Not a question but a statement. "The orphan from St. Mary. Your mother was a prostitute. Your father a nobody. You have nothing. You are nothing. And you think you deserve my son." Amelia stood frozen, her face drained of color. She recognized the woman instantly. The cold gray eyes, the sharp features, the way she looked down at her like an insect. This was Catherine Carbone, Victor's mother, the most powerful woman in the New York underworld. "I'm here," Catherine continued, her voice sweet but laced with venom. "I know everything about you, Amelia. I know you were beaten at the orphanage. I know you stole bread to survive. I know you don't have a single dollar to your name. Do you think you can come here, seduce my son, and climb into the position of mistress of the Carbone family? You are mistaken." Catherine stood, stepped closer to Amelia, lowering her voice to a whisper. "You will leave my son. You will disappear from his life, and you will never come back. If you don't comply, I'll make sure you disappear in another way, a permanent way." She turned and walked out, leaving Amelia trembling in the empty bar. The diamond ring on her hand suddenly felt heavy, like a curse, and Amelia knew that from that moment on, her happiness was being counted down, day by day. 2 weeks after her encounter with Catherine at the bar, Amelia discovered she was pregnant. She sat in the tiny bathroom of the apartment, staring at the 2 red lines on the test, tears streaming down her cheeks. They were tears of happiness, but also tears of fear. She knew Catherine would never accept this. She knew the woman would do anything to stop it. But she also knew she loved Victor, and she wanted to keep this child, to protect the living proof of their love. Amelia decided she would tell Victor that very night. She would tell him she was pregnant, that they were going to have a family, that nothing could ever tear them apart. She cooked his favorite dinner, lit candles, and waited. But Victor didn't come. He called to say there was an emergency, an important meeting with other families, and that he had to leave town for a few days. He apologized, promised he would make it up to her when he returned. Amelia said she understood, said she would wait, hiding the secret in her heart for the day he came back. She didn't know this was the opportunity Catherine had been waiting for. That night, as Amelia slept, violent pounding echoed through the apartment door. She jolted awake, her heart racing. Before she could react, the door was kicked open, and 4 men dressed in black stormed inside. They were large, brutal-looking, and they carried guns. Amelia screamed, tried to run toward the window, but one of them grabbed her by the hair and dragged her to the floor. She lay there trembling, her hands instinctively wrapping around her stomach, shielding the unborn child inside her. Then Catherine walked in. She wore a black fur coat, her gray eyes cold as a winter night, and on her lips was a smile Amelia would never forget, the smile of someone who held life and death in her hands. "I warned you," Catherine said, her voice light, almost conversational. "I gave you a chance to leave, but you didn't listen. You thought your love was strong enough to stand against me. You were wrong, foolish girl." Catherine gestured, and one of the guards yanked Amelia to her feet and slammed her against the wall. A cold gun barrel pressed against her temple. Amelia cried, her entire body shaking, but she forced herself not to scream. She didn't want Catherine to see how afraid she was. "You think I didn't know?" Catherine stepped closer, her gaze dropping to Amelia's stomach with disgust. "You're carrying my son's child, a mixed-blood child, born of a worthless orphan. You think I would allow that to happen?" Amelia sobbed, her voice trembling. "Please, don't hurt my child. I'll do anything you want. Please, my child is innocent." Catherine laughed, a chilling sound filling the small apartment. "Anything. Good. Then this is what you will do. You will leave New York tonight. You will disappear from my son's life forever. You will never contact him, never look for him, never tell him about this child. And if you do as I say, I'll let you and the child inside you live." Catherine tossed an envelope onto the floor in front of Amelia. Inside were $5,000 and a one-way bus ticket to anywhere she chose. "This is all you deserve. An orphan girl like you should be grateful I'm even allowing you to live." "And if I refuse?" Amelia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Catherine tilted her head and smiled. "If you refuse, you will die tonight, and the child inside you will die too. I'll make sure no one ever finds your body. Victor will think you left, that you betrayed him, that you only used him for his money. He will hate you, and he will forget you. Either way, the outcome is the same. You will vanish from my son's life. The only difference is whether you are alive or dead." Amelia closed her eyes, tears soaking her face. She thought of Victor, of his smile, of the way he held her every night, of the promises they had whispered to each other. She wanted to fight, to scream, to tell him the truth, but she looked down at her stomach and thought of the small life growing inside her. She couldn't risk her child's life. She couldn't let her baby die before ever seeing the light of day. "I'll go," Amelia said, her voice breaking like her heart. "But please let me leave one thing behind, something so Victor knows I didn't want to leave." Catherine considered for a moment, then nodded. "You can leave the ring. Only that, no letter, no message, no explanation." That night, Amelia placed the diamond ring on the pillow where Victor usually slept. She looked around the small apartment where they had loved each other, where they had dreamed of a future. Then she stepped out into the freezing night, one hand cradling her stomach, the other clutching the crumpled envelope of money. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know how she would survive. She only knew she had to protect the child inside her at any cost, even if it meant sacrificing her love, her happiness, and her entire life. Amelia boarded a night bus to Philadelphia, then from Philadelphia to Baltimore, then from Baltimore back to New Jersey. She ran like a hunted animal, never daring to stay in one place for too long, afraid Catherine would find her. The $5,000 were gone after 2 months. She found a cheap rented room on the outskirts of Brooklyn, far from anywhere Victor might ever go. She applied for work as a waitress at a small diner, hiding her growing belly beneath a loose apron. She worked 12 hours a day, her legs swollen, her back aching, but she didn't dare rest because every day off meant a day without money for food. At night, she lay in the damp little room, one hand resting on her stomach, talking to the unborn child. She told the baby about its father, about the man with gray eyes and a rare but gentle smile. She promised her child that no matter what happened, she would love it enough for both of them. Amelia gave birth in a public hospital on a night of pouring rain. She needed surgery because of complications, lying on the operating table alone with no family by her side. When the doctor placed the baby in her arms, Amelia broke down in sobs. The baby boy was tiny, his face red, his eyes tightly shut. But when he opened them for the first time, Amelia saw familiar gray eyes looking back at her. Victor's eyes. She named him Ethan Weston, because she didn't dare give him the name Carbone. After the birth, Amelia had to return to work after only 2 weeks because the hospital bills kept piling up. She left Ethan with an elderly neighbor for a small fee, then rushed to the diner for the morning shift, rushed to the laundromat for the afternoon shift, rushed to a bar for the night shift. 3 jobs, 20 hours a day. She slept no more than 4 hours. Her body grew weak. She lost weight visibly, dark circles sinking deep beneath her eyes. But every time she looked at Ethan, she found the strength to go on. When Ethan was 2, the landlord began harassing her. He knocked on her door at night, demanding she pay rent in other ways if she didn't have enough cash. Amelia refused, and he threw her out into the street in the middle of winter. She carried Ethan through the biting cold, not knowing where to go. That was the night she met Father Thomas. The elderly priest of St. Michael's Church saw the mother and child huddled outside the church doors and invited them inside. He let them stay in a small room behind the church, free of charge, asking only that Amelia help clean the church when she could. Father Thomas didn't ask about her past, didn't judge, didn't pity her. He simply helped, quietly and silently, like a guardian saint. But fate didn't spare Amelia. When Ethan was 3, he began having chest pain, trouble breathing, his lips turning blue. Doctors diagnosed him with a congenital heart condition, saying he needed urgent surgery or his life would be in danger. The cost of the operation was $150,000, a sum Amelia could never earn even in a lifetime. She borrowed from underground lenders, knowing the interest would crush her, but she had no choice. She used the borrowed money to buy Ethan's medicine, buying time while waiting for a miracle. With what little remained, she opened a small bakery, hoping to earn extra income. The bakery sat in a poor neighborhood, customers few and far between, but it was all she had. 5 years. 5 years Amelia lived in a waking hell. 5 years she worked until exhaustion, cried alone at night, watched her son grow weaker and weaker while she could do nothing. 5 years she kept the secret about Victor, about the Carbone family, about the diamond ring she had left on the pillow. 5 years she prayed every night, not for herself, but for Ethan. She begged God to let her son live, to let him be healthy, to let him have a future. And then, on an ordinary afternoon, the bakery door opened, the bell chimed softly, and Victor Carbone walked in. 5 years of waiting, 5 years of running, 5 years of keeping secrets collapsed in a single moment when his gray eyes locked onto hers. Back in the present, after the unexpected encounter in the bakery that afternoon, Victor couldn't focus on anything. He sat in the car, ordering Marco to drive aimlessly around the city while his mind spun with a million questions. That child was his. He knew it as surely as he knew he was breathing. The gray eyes, the shape of the face, the way the boy tilted his head when curious. All of it was him. But why hadn't Amelia said anything? Why had she hidden his son for 5 years? Why had she left without a single explanation? At exactly 7 in the evening, Victor stood at the back door of the bakery, as Amelia had asked. He came alone, without Marco, without bodyguards, without weapons. For the first time in 15 years, he stood on the streets of Brooklyn, with no one protecting him. He didn't care. He only wanted answers. Amelia opened the door, her face cold as stone. She said nothing, simply stepped aside to let him in. Victor crossed the threshold, and his heart clenched when he saw where his son lived. The room was smaller than the bathroom in his penthouse. A narrow bed pressed against the wall, the sheets old but clean. A small corner held a few cheap plastic toys, most of them faded with use. The walls were covered with crayon drawings, stick figures, houses, smiling suns. One drawing showed two people, one big and one small, with clumsy letters beneath it reading Mommy and Me. There was no Daddy in any of the pictures. Victor stood in the middle of the room, pain stabbing through his chest. His son, the heir to the Carbone Empire, lived in this cramped space, played with worn toys, while he slept in a mansion worth millions and rode through the city in armored cars. "Where is Ethan?" Victor asked, his voice rough. "Sleeping in the back room." Amelia folded her arms across her chest, standing far from him, as if afraid he might touch her. She had worked all day and had no strength left to fight, but she knew this confrontation couldn't be avoided. Victor turned to face her, his gray eyes burning. "Explain it. Why did you leave? Why did you hide my son? Do you know how long I've been looking for you? I hired detectives. I put out rewards. I tore this city apart, and you were here, right in Brooklyn, less than 20 minutes from my penthouse." Amelia laughed bitterly, a sound edged with tears. "You were looking for me. You really were. Or did you just believe what your mother told you? That I was a liar? That I left for money?" Victor froze. "My mother, don't pretend you're innocent, Victor." Amelia's voice shook as 5 years of resentment poured out. "Do you think I wanted to leave? Do you think I wanted to give birth alone in a public hospital? Do you think I wanted to work 3 jobs a day? Be harassed? Be thrown out onto the street? Watch my son get sick without enough money to save him? What is Ethan sick with?" Victor asked, sudden panic ripping through his voice. "Congenital heart disease," Amelia said, each word cutting into Victor's chest like a blade. "He needs surgery urgently. $150,000. I borrowed from loan sharks, sold my blood, did everything I could just to buy his medicine. Every day I'm afraid Ethan won't live to see tomorrow. And you, where were you? You were choosing wedding cakes for another woman." Victor felt the floor drop away beneath him. His son had a heart condition. His son could die at any moment, and he hadn't known anything. For 5 years, he hadn't known anything. "Why didn't you tell me?" Victor asked, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you call, write, do anything to let me know?" Amelia looked at him, her green eyes filled with pain and fury. "Because your mother put a gun to my head and told me that if I ever contacted you, she would kill both me and my child." Victor stood there as if struck by lightning, every sound in the small room seeming to disappear. His mother had done this. "No," his voice was barely a whisper. "That can't be true. My mother would never." Amelia cut him off, her voice cold as ice. "She came to our apartment with 4 bodyguards. She pressed a gun to my temple. She knew I was carrying your child, and she said that if I didn't disappear, she would kill both me and my baby. She handed me $5,000 and a bus ticket as if she were throwing scraps to a stray dog. She called me a whore's bastard, said I wasn't worthy of carrying the Carbone name. And do you know what the worst part was, Victor? She was right about one thing. She said you would never choose me over your family. And for 5 years, every single day, I asked myself if I had told you the truth. Would you have stood by me? Or would you have believed your mother like you always did?" Victor staggered back, his spine hitting the wall. It felt as if all the air had been ripped from his lungs. Fragments of memory spun through his mind. The day he returned to an empty apartment, the diamond ring lying on the pillow, the pain tearing through his chest. And then his mother came, held him, told him Amelia had only used him, that she had taken money and left, that he should forget her and focus on the family. He had believed her. He had believed every word because he couldn't accept that Amelia would leave him without reason. He needed a reason to survive the pain, and his mother had given him one. A lie. "I looked for you," Victor said, his voice trembling. "I looked for you for the first 2 years. I hired the best investigators. I spent millions of dollars, but no one could find you. Because your mother paid them not to," Amelia replied, bitterness lacing her words. "Do you know why I was right here in Brooklyn and no one ever found me? Because Catherine Carbone controls everything. She knew where I was for 5 years. She just didn't tell you. Victor slid down to the floor, his knees no longer able to hold him. He sat there with his back against the wall, his hands clutching his head. The most powerful mafia boss in New York looked like a child who had just been betrayed by the person he loved most. 5 years, he whispered. 5 years I hated you for leaving. 5 years I thought you betrayed me. 5 years I tried to forget you and couldn't. And all that time, my son grew up without a father, with a heart condition, living in poverty, while I sat in a $1 million mansion, not even knowing he existed. Amelia looked at him, and for the first time in 5 years, she didn't see the cold mafia boss. She saw the man she had loved, the man who had knelt before her in the falling snow and asked her to marry him, breaking apart in front of her. She wanted to go to him, to hold him the way she once had, but 5 years of suffering had built a wall too high between them. "Does Ethan know about me?" Victor asked, lifting his head, gray eyes flooded with pain. "Does he know I'm his father?" Amelia shook her head. "He asks about his father every day. Every morning when he goes to school, he sees other children being picked up by their dads, and he asks me where his daddy is. I don't know what to say. I only tell him that daddy is very far away and can't come home. He draws pictures every day, always leaving an empty space beside me and him, as if waiting for someone to fill it." Tears rolled down Victor's cheeks. The first time he had cried in 15 years. He cried for the 5 years he had lost, for the son who had grown up without a father, for the woman he loved who had suffered alone. He cried for the betrayal of his own mother, the woman who had stolen his family and left him living in the darkness of lies. At that moment, the door to the back room creaked open. Ethan stood there, eyes half closed with sleep, clutching a worn stuffed bear. "Mommy, I heard someone crying." Amelia rushed to him, kneeling to his level. "It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy just has a guest. Go back to sleep." But Ethan had already seen Victor sitting on the floor, his eyes widening. "It's the man from the bakery," Ethan said, his voice still drowsy but full of curiosity. "Who are you? Why are you crying? Are you sad?" "When I'm sad, Mommy hugs me and I feel better. Do you want me to hug you?" Victor looked at the 4-year-old child standing before him with gray eyes identical to his own, offering him a hug with the purest innocence. And his heart, a heart hardened by years in a world of blood and violence, shattered into a million pieces. Victor left the bakery close to midnight, after Amelia put Ethan back to sleep. He didn't say goodbye, only looked at her one last time with eyes full of pain and promised he would come back. He needed time. He needed proof. He needed to be certain that everything Amelia had said was true before confronting his mother. On the way back, Victor called Marco. His voice was cold as steel, stripped of all emotion. "Come to the penthouse right now. Bring everyone you trust the most. We have work to do." An hour later, Marco and 3 of Victor's most loyal men sat in his office. They watched their boss with unease, having never seen him like this. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched tight, his entire presence radiating a quiet fury more terrifying than any rage they had ever witnessed. "I need you to investigate something," Victor said, his voice flat, as if holding a storm inside. 5 years ago, the night Amelia disappeared, someone came to our apartment. I need to know who it was, what they drove, what they did, what they said. Find security cameras, witnesses, anything. And I need the medical records of a child named Ethan Weston, 4 years old, living in Brooklyn. Marco nodded without asking a single question. He knew when to stay silent and obey. 24 hours later, Marco returned with a briefcase full of documents. His face was pale, his hands slightly shaking as he set the case on the desk. "Boss," he said hoarsely, "I found everything, but you're not going to like what I found." Victor opened the briefcase. The first thing he saw was a still image from a security camera in the building where he and Amelia had once lived. The footage was grainy but clear enough to recognize a familiar black limousine parked outside the building at 11 at night. The exact night Amelia disappeared, his mother's car. Next came the statement of the building's security guard, who had since quit and moved to Florida. Marco had tracked him down and persuaded him to talk. The man stated that 4 men dressed in black entered the building with an older woman, went up to Victor and Amelia's floor, stayed for about 30 minutes, then left. The woman had paid him to forget what he had seen. Then there was the report from the private investigators Victor had hired 5 years earlier. Marco had dug into their bank accounts and uncovered a large transfer from Catherine Carbone's personal account, made exactly 2 days after Victor hired them. They had taken money to not find Amelia, to report that she had vanished without a trace. Victor read every page, his hands trembling, the vein at his temple pulsing violently. Everything Amelia had said was true. His mother had orchestrated it all, had driven away the woman he loved, had hidden the existence of his son from him, had paid to ensure he would never find them. 5 years. 5 years his mother had watched him suffer, comforted him, lied to him, while knowing exactly where Amelia was and that his son was living in poverty. "There's one more thing, boss," Marco said, handing Victor a medical file. The boy's records. Victor opened it, and the blood in his veins seemed to freeze. Ethan Weston, 4 years old, diagnosed with congenital heart disease at the age of 3, ventricular septal defect, requiring urgent surgery, prognosis without surgery, progressive heart failure, estimated life expectancy no more than 2 years. Surgery cost $150,000. Payment status unpaid, patient currently on the waiting list. Victor's eyes dropped to the doctor's notes. The patient's mother has repeatedly requested postponement of surgery due to financial hardship. The patient is currently on medication to manage symptoms, but this is only a temporary solution. Surgery is strongly recommended within the next 6 months to avoid severe complications. He closed the file and shut his eyes. His son could die. His son could die while he sat here with hundreds of millions of dollars in his accounts, never knowing the boy existed. Amelia had fought alone to keep their child alive, borrowing from loan sharks, selling her blood, doing whatever it took, while he was choosing wedding cakes for another woman. Victor stood and walked to the window, looking down at New York City glowing in the night. Somewhere out there, in a small room behind a bakery, his son was sleeping with a failing heart, and in a luxurious mansion in Manhattan, his mother was sleeping peacefully, unaware that every crime she had committed was about to be dragged into the light. The next morning, Victor drove to his mother's mansion on the Upper East Side. He didn't give notice, didn't bring bodyguards, carrying only a briefcase filled with evidence. The gate guard tried to stop him, but the look in Victor's eyes made the man step back without daring to say a word. Victor entered the mansion and walked straight to the breakfast room, where Catherine sat sipping her tea as she did every day. She wore a pearl-colored silk dress, her hair neatly swept up, looking like a refined society woman with not a single worry in the world. When she saw Victor, she smiled and set her teacup down. "My son, why are you here so early today? Is something important happening? There's no need to pretend anymore." "Mother." Victor threw the briefcase onto the table, papers scattering everywhere. "I know everything." Catherine looked at the documents spread across the table. The security camera photos, witness statements, financial records. She didn't look surprised or frightened. She simply took another sip of tea, then placed the cup down with a calm that was terrifying. "So you've met that girl," she said lightly, as if talking about the weather. "I suppose this day was bound to come sooner or later. That girl has a name, Mother." Victor ground his teeth. "Her name is Amelia, and my son's name is Ethan, your grandson, whom you allowed to live in poverty for 4 years. Catherine stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the perfectly manicured garden. She didn't look at Victor as she spoke. "I did what was necessary to protect this family, Victor." "Who is that Amelia girl?" "A nameless orphan, the child of a prostitute, raised in an institution. She has no education, no background, nothing. She would be your fatal weakness, a stain on the Carbone family history. Our enemies would use her against you, humiliate you through her. I couldn't allow that to happen. You put a gun to the head of the woman I love." Victor stepped closer, his voice trembling as he struggled to contain his fury. "You threatened to kill her and my son. You drove her away while she was pregnant. You knew I had a son for 5 years and never said a word." Catherine turned to face him, her gray eyes cold as stone. "And I'd do it again if I had to," she said without a trace of regret. "Do you think I did it because I hated that girl? I did it because I love you. I spent my entire life building your position, turning you into the head of this empire. I won't let a worthless orphan destroy everything. Worthless." Victor laughed, the sound bitter and broken. "She raised my son alone for 4 years. She worked 3 jobs a day, borrowed from loan sharks, sold her blood to buy medicine when he had a heart condition. She's stronger than anyone you've ever met. And you're a coward who used guns and money to threaten a pregnant woman with no protection. Is that what you call protecting the family? Watch your words, Victor." Catherine's voice sharpened. "I'm still your mother. You don't have the right to speak to me like that. You lost that right when you drove Amelia away." Victor replied, his voice eerily calm. "I'll never forgive you for this. Never." Catherine narrowed her eyes. studying her son. She knew Victor was serious. She saw the resolve in his gaze, but she wasn't someone who surrendered easily. "What are you going to do?" she asked coldly. "Break off the engagement with Alexandra. Shatter the alliance with the Benedetti family. Do you know the consequences? Don Benedetti won't forgive this humiliation. He'll declare war on us. You'll lose half our allies, half our territory. You'll turn the Carbone family into a target for every enemy we have. And for what? For a nameless orphan girl and her bastard child. That bastard child is your grandson," Victor said, his voice hard as steel. "That child carries Carbone blood, and I won't let my son grow up without a father the way I did. I'll break the engagement with Alexandra. I'll bring Amelia and Ethan to live with me, and if Don Benedetti wants war, I'll give him war." Catherine looked at Victor, and for the first time she saw something in her son's eyes she had never seen before. Defiance. Rebellion. The son who had always obeyed her, always followed her will, was standing against her for a woman. "If you do this," she said slowly, "you'll be alone. I won't protect you from the consequences. I won't stand by you when everything collapses. You'll lose me, Victor. I lost you 5 years ago." Victor replied as he turned and walked away. "I just didn't know it until now." He left the mansion without looking back. Behind him, Catherine stood by the window, her gray eyes narrowing with calculation. She wasn't someone who accepted defeat. If Victor wouldn't listen, she would have to use another way. She picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number. When the voice on the other end answered, her tone was cold as ice. "I have information you might be interested in, about Victor Carbone and his weakness." After the confrontation with Catherine, Victor didn't return to the penthouse. He drove straight to Amelia's bakery, standing outside the door for a long time before knocking. When Amelia opened it, she saw him standing there, eyes weary yet filled with determination. "I want to see my son," he said, his voice hoarse. "Please, Amelia, give me a chance." Amelia looked at him for a long moment, then stepped aside. From that day on, Victor began visiting Ethan every single day. He didn't arrive with armored convoys or bodyguards. He drove an ordinary car, parked several blocks away from the bakery, then walked over like an ordinary man. At first, Ethan was shy, hiding behind his mother's legs, staring at the unfamiliar man, but Victor was patient. He sat down on the floor at the child's eye level and asked Ethan if he wanted to see him draw. He drew a dinosaur so ugly that Ethan burst into laughter, and the ice between them began to melt. On the second day, Victor brought a box of new crayons, not the cheap kind Ethan usually used, but the best kind, with 72 different colors. Ethan stared at the box as if it were treasure, his eyes shining. "Uncle Victor, there's a gold color," he shouted, holding up the shimmering crayon. "Mommy, look, there's gold like the sun." Victor watched his son turn the box over in wonder, and warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't known in 15 years as a Mafia boss. On the third day, he brought a large, stuffed bear. On the fourth day, a puzzle set. On the fifth day, a toy car. Amelia wanted to refuse the expensive gifts, but she couldn't bring herself to, when she saw the happiness in Ethan's eyes. The boy had never had so many toys, had never had anyone bring him gifts every day. And Victor learned how to smile when he was with Ethan. Not the cold smile of a Mafia boss, but a real smile, the smile of a father. 1 week later, Ethan no longer called him Uncle Victor. The boy ran to the door every time he heard the familiar knock, threw his arms around Victor's legs, and shouted, "Victor's here, Victor's here." They sat on the floor, drawing together. Clumsy pictures with golden suns, and a house with 3 people standing in front. Ethan drew himself in the middle, Mommy on the left, and a tall man on the right, with a note underneath that said Victor. For the first time, the empty space in Ethan's drawings was filled. Amelia stood in the small kitchen, watching them through the doorway. She saw Victor, the most feared Mafia boss in New York, lying flat on the floor so Ethan could climb onto his back like a horse. She saw him pretend to fall in pain just to make Ethan laugh. She saw him carefully wipe Ethan's nose when the boy had a runny nose, clumsy yet strangely gentle. And her heart, a heart that had frozen after 5 years of suffering, began to soften little by little. One evening, after Ethan had fallen fast asleep, Victor sat at the small dining table, watching Amelia wash dishes. "Does he know I'm his father?" he asked, his voice soft as breath. Amelia stopped, not turning around. "He knows there's a man who comes to see him every day and loves him. That's enough for now. We'll tell him the truth when the time comes." Victor nodded, even though Amelia didn't see it. "I've contacted the hospital," he said. "The best doctors in the city will operate on Ethan. I've paid all the costs. He'll be healthy, Amelia. I promise." Amelia froze completely, her shoulders trembling. She didn't turn around, not wanting Victor to see the tears streaming down her face. For 5 years she had fought alone. For 5 years she had lived in fear every night that her son wouldn't live to see the next day. And now, in just 1 week, Victor had done what she hadn't been able to do in 4 years. She hated herself for feeling grateful. She hated herself because her heart was softening. But she couldn't stop it, because every time she saw Victor holding Ethan, every time she heard her son's laughter fill the small room, she remembered why she had fallen in love with this man. And she was afraid that she was falling in love with him all over again. 2 weeks after Victor began visiting Ethan every day, everything seemed to be getting better. The doctors had scheduled Ethan's surgery for the end of the month, and the boy appeared healthier than before. But fate is never kind to those who have already endured too much suffering. That afternoon, Ethan was sitting in the bakery drawing when he suddenly stopped, his face turning pale. "Mommy, my chest hurts," he whispered, his small hand clutching his shirt. "I can't breathe." Amelia rushed to him, and her heart felt as if it stopped when she saw Ethan's lips turning blue. The boy collapsed onto the floor, his eyes squeezed shut, his body convulsing. Amelia screamed, called for an ambulance, her hands shaking so badly she could barely press the numbers on her phone. She pulled her son into her arms, feeling his heart flutter wildly beneath his thin shirt. "Ethan, look at Mommy," she cried, her voice breaking. "You have to breathe. Don't leave Mommy. Please don't leave Mommy." The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes, but to Amelia, it was the longest 10 minutes of her life. They lifted Ethan onto a stretcher, fitted an oxygen mask over his face, racing against time. Amelia sat in the ambulance, gripping her son's hand, watching the numbers on the heart monitor jump erratically. With her other hand, she called Victor, her voice nothing but choked sobs. "Ethan, hospital, heart." Victor didn't need to hear anything else. He was in the middle of a meeting with his men when Amelia's call came through. He shot to his feet, knocking over tables and chairs, running out of the room like a madman. He jumped into his car, floored the accelerator, tearing through the crowded streets of New York as if traffic laws didn't exist. Red lights, blaring horns, curses from pedestrians, he heard none of it. All he heard was Amelia's broken voice echoing in his head and the image of Ethan lying motionless on the floor haunting him. 20 minutes. Victor drove from Manhattan to Brooklyn in 20 minutes, shattering every record and probably a dozen traffic laws. He abandoned the car right in front of the emergency entrance, didn't bother locking it, and charged inside like a wild animal. He shoved past anyone in his way, shouting Ethan's name until a nurse led him to the intensive care unit. Amelia stood outside the closed doors, her face ghostly pale, tears streaming nonstop. When she saw Victor, she collapsed into his arms, her entire body trembling. "He's in there," she sobbed, her voice hoarse. His heart stopped in the ambulance. They had to shock him to bring him back. "Victor, he can't die. He can't die." Victor held Amelia, feeling her shake like a leaf in a storm. He didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do. For the first time in his life, the most powerful mafia boss in New York felt utterly helpless. He could order people killed without blinking, could control an entire criminal empire, but he couldn't do anything to save his son lying beyond those doors. 2 hours later, the doctor came out. "The boy is out of immediate danger," he said, his voice tired but relieved. "But his heart condition is extremely serious. We need to operate right away. We can't wait until the end of the month. The cost will be very high, and the risks are significant." "Do it," Victor said instantly, without a second of hesitation. "Whatever my son needs, whatever it costs, I'll pay. Call the best surgeons, get the best equipment. I don't care how much it costs. Just save my son." That night, after Ethan was moved into recovery, Victor sat by his bedside the entire night. He didn't leave for even a minute. He sat there, holding Ethan's small hand, watching his chest rise and fall weakly beneath the hospital blanket. Wires and machines covered the boy's body, the steady beeping of the heart monitor the only sound in the room. Victor looked at his son's face, that small face with eyes closed tight, and silent tears fell. 4 years. 4 years the boy had lived without him knowing. 4 years the boy had fought a vicious heart disease without his father by his side, and now he might lose his son before he could even tell him that he was his father. For the first time in 36 years of his life, Victor Carbone prayed. He didn't know how to pray, didn't know what to say to a God he had never believed in, but he closed his eyes, held his son's hand tightly, and whispered into the darkness, "Please let my son live. I'll do anything. I'll give up anything. Just give my child a chance." Across the room, Amelia sat curled up on a small chair, watching Victor pray beside Ethan's bed, and she knew that no matter what happened, she was no longer alone. While Victor sat watchfully beside Ethan's hospital bed, Catherine Carbone sat in her study, staring at a photograph sent by her spy. The image showed Victor holding Amelia outside the emergency room doors, his face filled with fear and love. Catherine clenched her teeth, her fingernails scraping across the oak desk and leaving deep gouges in the wood. Her son had chosen, and she had lost. But Catherine Carbone was not the kind of woman who accepted defeat. She had warned Victor about the consequences, and he hadn't listened, so she would show him exactly what those consequences were. She picked up the phone and dialed the same number she had called after her confrontation with Victor the week before. On the other end, a rough male voice answered. "Mrs. Carbone, it's an honor to hear from you again." "I have information you want, Tony," Catherine said, her voice cold as ice. "The location of the girl and the child. And I know when Victor will leave the hospital." Tony Moreno sat in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of New York, a cruel smile spreading across his face. He was the sworn enemy of the Carbone family, the man Victor had defeated and stripped of half his territory 5 years earlier. He had been waiting for a chance at revenge ever since, and now that chance was being handed to him on a silver platter by his enemy's own mother. "What do you want in return?" he asked, unwilling to believe Catherine would betray her son without conditions. "I want the girl Amelia to disappear forever," Catherine replied, her voice unwavering. "But don't touch the child. He carries Carbone blood." Tony laughed, a vicious sound echoing through the empty warehouse. "Of course, Mrs. Carbone. I'll take care of the girl for you." But he was lying. Tony Moreno had no intention of taking only Amelia. He wanted more. He wanted Victor on his knees, wanted to see the proudest Mafia boss in New York, begging for the lives of those he loved. The child was the perfect leverage. After ending the call with Catherine, Tony summoned his men, 12 of his most loyal enforcers, men who would kill without hesitation. He spread a map of Brooklyn across the table, marking the location of Amelia's bakery, the hospital where Ethan was staying, the routes Victor usually traveled. "Victor Carbone has a weakness," he said, tapping the map with his finger. "A woman and a child. We'll take them both, and when Victor wants them back, he'll pay the price. The Eastern Territory, the full list of his operations, and maybe even his life." His men laughed, their voices echoing in the darkness. They had waited far too long for this day. The plan was laid out in detail. They would wait until Ethan was discharged, until Victor believed everything was safe, until his guard was down. That would be when they struck. In the hospital, Victor had no idea that darkness was closing in. He sat beside Ethan's bed, watching his son slowly recover after a successful surgery. The doctors said Ethan would need several days to fully stabilize, and Victor had stationed guards outside the room. But he didn't know that the most dangerous enemy wasn't coming from the streets. The most dangerous enemy was his own mother, sitting in her luxurious mansion, waiting for news of her son's downfall. Catherine gazed out the window, her gray eyes cold and without regret. She told herself she was doing this for the Carbone family, for the honor of the bloodline, but deep down, she knew the truth. She was doing this because she couldn't accept losing control of her son. She was doing this out of pride and tyranny, the cruelty of a mother who had never learned how to love, and her betrayal would unleash consequences so terrible that even she couldn't have foreseen them. 5 days after the surgery, Ethan was discharged from the hospital. The boy was still weak but far stronger than before, his gray eyes lighting up at the thought of going home. Victor wanted to take mother and child back to his mansion, where the security system was the strongest, and guards stood watch 24 hours a day. But Amelia refused. She wanted to return to the bakery, a place familiar to Ethan, a place where he felt safe. She didn't want her son pulled too quickly into Victor's world. Victor agreed reluctantly but insisted on placing 2 bodyguards outside the bakery. Amelia nodded, and he felt a small measure of relief. He didn't know that this would be the last decision they made before the darkness fell. That night, Victor had to leave to handle an emergency. One of his warehouses had been raided by the police, and he needed to be there to manage the situation. He kissed Ethan's forehead as the boy slept, told Amelia he would come back as soon as he could. He didn't know the raid was a trap. staged to pull him away from the bakery at the exact moment Tony needed. 2 hours after Victor left, the 2 bodyguards outside the bakery were taken down in silence. Suppressed bullets pierced their heads before they could even draw their weapons. Amelia was sitting in the kitchen reading when she heard a strange noise at the front door. She stood and went to check, and her heart froze when she saw the door kicked open. 4 men dressed in black rushed in, faces covered, guns in their hands. Amelia didn't scream. She turned and ran toward the back room where Ethan was sleeping, a mother's instinct stronger than fear. She had to protect her child. She had to get him out. But they were faster. One of them grabbed her by the hair and slammed her to the floor. Amelia fought, scratched, bit the hand holding her. She grabbed the cast iron pan from the stove and swung it hard into another man's face, blood spraying. She fought like a wild animal, protecting her young, fearless, unyielding. But they were more, and they were stronger. A brutal punch to her temple sent her staggering, her vision blurring. She tried to rise, but a kick to her stomach dropped her to the floor. They beat her, kicked her, until she lay motionless on the kitchen tiles, blood soaking her face. "Mommy." Ethan's scream came from the back room. "Mommy, I'm scared." Amelia tried to open her eyes, tried to reach toward her son's voice, but her body wouldn't respond. She could only lie there, helpless, watching as one of the kidnappers went into Ethan's room and dragged the boy out. Ethan screamed, thrashed, calling for Mommy again and again. He saw his mother lying bloody on the floor, and his cries turned into desperate wails. "Mommy, wake up. Mommy, don't die. I'm scared, Mommy. Take them," a voice ordered. "Be gentle with the kid. He's our leverage." They shoved Amelia into a sack and threw her into a truck like cargo. Ethan was carried by another man, still crying and calling for Mommy, his voice fading as the truck disappeared into the night. The small bakery was left in silence, the door hanging open, furniture overturned, blood smeared across the floor. The 2 dead bodyguards lay outside, eyes wide open, staring up at the starless sky. And somewhere in the city, Victor Carbone was dealing with a staged raid, unaware that his family had just been torn from his hands. Victor returned to the bakery at 3 a.m, after dealing with what had turned out to be nothing more than a misunderstanding by the local police. He had felt that something was wrong all night, a gnawing sense of dread chewing at his chest. When the car stopped in front of the bakery and he saw the door hanging wide open, 2 bodies of his guards lying on the sidewalk, his heart seemed to stop. He jumped out of the car, ran inside, and his world collapsed. The bakery was in ruins, furniture overturned, blood smeared across the kitchen floor. Amelia wasn't there. Ethan wasn't there. They were gone. Victor dropped to his knees, his hand touching a pool of dried blood, and a scream tore from his chest. The scream of a wounded animal, of a man who had just lost everything. Marco ran in, his face drained of color at the sight before him. He had never seen Victor like this, kneeling amid the wreckage, his shoulders shaking in waves. "Boss, your phone," Marco said, his voice hoarse. "There's a message." Victor took the phone with trembling hands. A message from an unknown number, attached to a video. He pressed play, and what he saw made the blood in his veins turn to ice. Amelia was sitting on a cold concrete floor, her hands tied behind her back, her face covered in blood and bruises. Her lips were swollen, one eye nearly shut from the beating. She stared into the camera with exhaustion and defiance, not crying, not begging. Behind her, in a dark corner of the room, Ethan was curled up, hugging his knees and sobbing. The boy kept calling Mommy, his voice raw from crying too much. Then a face appeared on the screen, Tony Moreno. He smiled cruelly, eyes filled with malice. "Carbone, long time no see," he said, his tone mocking. "I've got something very precious of yours. A woman and a kid. You want them alive. You know what to do. The Eastern Territory, all of it. Your entire network list, every connection, every warehouse. You've got 48 hours. If you try any tricks, I'll send you one of the kid's fingers, starting with the pinky." The video ended. Victor sat motionless, staring at the black screen, his grip crushing the phone until the casing cracked. 48 hours. 48 hours to save Amelia and Ethan. But if he handed over territory and his entire network, hundreds of people in his organization would die. Families, children, men who had sworn loyalty to him. He couldn't trade their lives. But he also couldn't let Amelia and Ethan die. "Find where they're being held," Victor said, his voice cold as ice, thick with killing intent. "Use every resource we have. I want to know where Tony's keeping them within 24 hours. and find out who leaked the information to Tony. Someone inside sold us out. Marco nodded and turned to carry out the orders. Victor stayed behind alone in the destroyed bakery, staring at Ethan's crayon drawings still taped to the wall. Drawings of 3 people holding hands beneath a sun. He would find them, he would save them, and he would kill every person who had dared to touch his family. 12 hours later, Marco returned with information that struck Victor like lightning. "We traced the calls to Tony Moreno's number," Marco said, hesitating. "Boss, you're not going to like this. The calls came from your mother's mansion. 2 of them. 1 2 weeks ago. 1 just before the kidnapping." Victor stood perfectly still, all emotion draining from his face. He remembered the confrontation with his mother, her warning, the cold look in her eyes when she told him he would face consequences. She had done this. His own mother had sold her grandson, and the woman her son loved, to an enemy. She had placed Ethan's life in the hands of a killer to punish him for defying her. "Is there anything else?" Victor asked, his voice empty. Marco swallowed. "Our informant inside Tony's operation says Catherine Carbone told Tony to kill only Amelia and not touch Ethan. But Tony has no intention of keeping that promise. He plans to use both of them to force you, and once he gets what he wants, he'll kill them both." Victor closed his eyes and drew a deep breath. When he opened them, his gaze was cold as hell itself. "Find Tony's location," he said, each word carved in stone. "Gather everyone who's loyal to me. We're going to take my family back, and after that, I'll deal with my mother." 20 hours after receiving the ransom video, Victor knew exactly where Tony was holding Amelia and Ethan, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of New Jersey, about an hour's drive from the city. His informant reported that Tony had around 15 gunmen guarding the place, all of them cold-blooded killers. Victor didn't care. He would kill every last one if he had to. At midnight, Victor's convoy moved toward the warehouse. 20 men, the most loyal warriors of the Carbone family, all carrying heavy weapons and ready to die for their boss. But Victor led from the front, not hiding behind anyone, not letting anyone fight in his place. This was his family. This was his battle. They stopped about 500 meters from the warehouse and advanced through the darkness. Victor signaled his men to spread out and surround the building from every direction. He checked the gun in his hand, chambered a round, and walked straight toward the main gate. He didn't need to sneak in. He wanted Tony to know he had arrived. The first gunshot rang out when a guard spotted Victor. The bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing through his suit jacket, but Victor didn't slow down. He fired back twice, and the guard dropped with a bullet between his eyes. Hell broke loose. Gunfire thundered everywhere, muzzle flashes tearing through the darkness, screams and groans from the wounded echoing across the yard. Victor's men stormed in from all sides, clashing with Tony's crew. Blood spilled, bodies fell, but Victor kept moving forward. He pushed toward the main warehouse, dropping anyone who stood in his way. A bullet tore through his left upper arm, blood soaking his sleeve, but he felt no pain. The only pain he felt was the thought of Amelia and Ethan, somewhere inside that building, terrified and waiting. Victor kicked the warehouse door open and stepped inside with his gun raised. The interior was almost pitch black, lit only by a few weak bulbs. He heard Ethan's crying coming from the far end of the corridor, and his heart tightened. He ran toward the sound, taking down 2 more men along the way. Then he saw them. Amelia lay on the concrete floor, her hands still bound, her face streaked with dried blood, but her eyes were open and locked onto him. Ethan sat in the corner, sobbing, but when the boy saw Victor, his eyes lit up. "Victor," Ethan called out, his voice hoarse. "Victor came to save us." Victor took a step toward them, but a laugh behind him made him stop. "How touching, Carbone." Tony Moreno stepped out of the shadows, his gun aimed straight at Victor's head. The coldest Mafia boss in New York with such a soft heart. Who would have thought? Victor turned to face his enemy. Tony looked more worn than Victor remembered. His face carved with scars from years in the underworld, but his eyes were still vicious and unhinged. "Drop the gun," Tony ordered. "If not, I shoot the girl first." He aimed at Amelia, his finger on the trigger. Victor looked at Amelia, looked at Ethan, then back at Tony. He let the gun fall to the floor and raised his hands. "All right," he said calmly. "You win." Tony grinned and stepped closer. He didn't see the knife Victor had hidden up his sleeve. When Tony came close enough, Victor moved like lightning. He knocked Tony's gun aside just as the trigger was pulled, the bullet tearing past Victor's ear. At the same moment, Victor drew the knife and drove it straight into Tony's stomach. Tony screamed and collapsed, still trying to fire. Victor kicked the gun out of his hand, jumped on top of him, and began punching his face again and again. Blood sprayed, bones cracked, but Victor didn't stop. He kept hitting until Tony's face was unrecognizable, until the man stopped moving. Then Victor rose, breathing hard, staring down at the broken, unconscious form at his feet. "You touched my family," Victor said, his voice cold as ice. "Death is too easy for you," he signaled to Marco, who had just rushed in. "Lock him up. I have other plans for him." Then Victor turned and ran to Amelia and Ethan. He cut the ropes from Amelia's wrists and pulled her into his arms, feeling her body shaking against him. Ethan crawled over and wrapped his arms around both of them, sobbing. They held each other in the middle of the warehouse, filled with corpses and the stench of gunpowder. And none of it mattered. They were alive. They had found each other, and Victor would never let anyone tear them apart again. Victor dropped to his knees beside Amelia, his hands shaking as he cut through the rough ropes that had bitten into her wrists for countless hours. Her skin was scraped raw, dried blood crusted in dark streaks along her arms. When the last strand fell to the concrete floor, Amelia collapsed into his arms, her entire body trembling uncontrollably. Victor held her as tightly as he could, not caring that blood from his own wounded arm soaked into her clothes, not caring about the stench of gunpowder and death surrounding them. All he knew was that she was alive. She was here, in his arms, and that was all that mattered. "I'm sorry," Victor whispered into her hair, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I'm sorry for everything." Amelia didn't speak. She only clung to him harder, tears streaming down her face, mixing with blood and grime. She had thought she would die in that warehouse, had thought Ethan would have to watch his mother be murdered before his eyes. But Victor had come. He had come to save them. "Mommy." Ethan's voice sounded small and shaking. Amelia turned quickly and opened her arms. Ethan ran to her and threw himself into her embrace, sobbing uncontrollably. He wrapped his arms around her neck, his whole body quivering as broken cries echoed in the still air. "I was so scared, Mommy," Ethan cried, his voice hoarse. "Those people hurt Mommy. I called you and you didn't wake up. I thought Mommy was dead." "Mommy's okay, sweetheart." Amelia held him and kissed his hair again and again. "Mommy's here. Mommy isn't going anywhere." Ethan lifted his head and looked at Victor, who was kneeling beside them. His gray eyes were red from crying, but there was something new in them now, a recognition that hadn't been there before. "Mommy told me," Ethan said softly. "Mommy said Victor is my daddy. When the bad people took us, Mommy hugged me and said Daddy would come save us. Mommy said don't be scared because Daddy would never leave me." Victor looked at Amelia, shock and emotion flooding his eyes. Amelia nodded faintly, tears still falling. She had told Ethan the truth in their darkest hours, when she thought they wouldn't survive. She wanted her son to know who his father was, even if only once, before everything ended. "And Daddy really came," Ethan said, his gray eyes fixed on Victor. "Daddy came to save Mommy and me. Daddy hurt the bad people. Daddy's my hero." Then the boy let go of Amelia and did something Victor had never imagined he would ever receive. Ethan wrapped his small arms around Victor's neck, holding on as if afraid he might disappear. "I love Daddy," Ethan whispered into his ear. "Daddy, don't go away anymore. Daddy, stay with me and Mommy forever, okay?" Victor froze, his entire body numb. In 36 years of life, he had killed, had held power over life and death, had made an entire city tremble. But never had he felt anything like this. Never had he felt unconditionally loved, needed, called Daddy by a small, innocent voice. Tears slid down Victor's face. The second time in his life he had cried, and both times were for this 4-year-old boy. He held Ethan tightly, one arm reaching out to pull Amelia into the other, enclosing the two most important people in his life. "Daddy promises," Victor said, his voice trembling but unshakable. "Daddy isn't going anywhere ever again. Daddy will stay with you and Mommy forever. Daddy will protect you until his last breath. No one is allowed to hurt you again. No one." They held each other in the dark warehouse, 3 souls from 3 different worlds, torn apart by 5 years of pain and lies, finally finding their way back to one another. Outside, the sound of ambulance sirens wailed. Victor's men were securing the scene, but no one dared step inside to disturb them. Marco stood guard at the doorway, his eyes damp as he watched his boss, the most feared Mafia king in New York, crying in the arms of a 4-year-old child. 3 days after the rescue, when Amelia and Ethan had been brought to Victor's estate under strict protection, Victor convened a summit of the most powerful Mafia families in New York. It was a meeting he had postponed for far too long, a meeting where he would have to face every consequence of his choices. The summit was held at an elegant Italian restaurant in Manhattan, a place where the Dons often gathered to settle serious matters. 7 families, 7 bosses, sat around a long table, each with 2 bodyguards standing behind them. Don Benedetti sat across from Victor, his gaze cold as ice. Alexandra seated beside her father with barely contained fury on her face. Catherine Carbone was also present, sitting at the far end of the table, her back straight, her chin lifted, as if she had done nothing wrong. Victor stood up, and every eye in the room turned toward him. He placed a briefcase on the table, opened it, took out several folders, and distributed them to each Don. "I called this meeting to make the truth public," Victor said, his voice carrying through the room. "The truth about why I canceled my engagement to Alexandra Benedetti, and the truth about the crimes committed by someone in my own family." Don Benedetti flipped through the documents, his brow furrowing. "What is this?" "This is proof that 5 years ago, my mother, Catherine Carbone, threatened to kill the woman I loved and the son I didn't know she was carrying," Victor said, his gaze sweeping across the room. "She held a gun to a pregnant woman's head, drove her away with $5,000 and a bus ticket, then paid detectives to make sure I would never find them." Catherine shot to her feet, her face draining of color. "Victor, you have no right." "I'm not finished." Victor cut her off, his voice cold as steel. 3 days ago, when I finally found my family, my mother did something even worse. She contacted Tony Moreno, an enemy of the Carbone family, and gave him the location of my son and the boy's mother. She sold out her own grandson to an enemy. The room fell silent. The Dons glanced at one another, then looked at Catherine with entirely different eyes. In their world, family was everything. Betraying one's family to side with an enemy was an unforgivable sin, a stain that could never be washed away. "That's a lie," Catherine screamed, her face twisting with rage. "It's all lies from that orphan girl. She seduced my son. This is the recording of your call with Tony Moreno," Victor said as he played the audio. Catherine's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "I have some information you might be interested in, about Victor Carbone and his weakness." Catherine stood frozen as all the color drained from her face. She couldn't deny it anymore. That voice was hers. Those words were hers. In front of the 7 most powerful men in the city, her crimes were laid bare. Don Benedetti closed the folder and looked at Victor with an unreadable expression. "So you canceled the engagement with my daughter for an illegitimate child and an unknown woman?" "I canceled the engagement because I can't marry one person while my heart belongs to another," Victor replied calmly but firmly. "I know this could lead to war between our families, but I can't build a future on lies. My son deserves a real family, not a political performance." Don Benedetti was silent for a long moment, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. Alexandra tried to speak, but her father signaled her to stay quiet. "You have courage," Don Benedetti finally said. "You stand here, publicly humiliating my daughter, destroying an alliance our families negotiated for 2 years. You know I could declare war right now." "I know," Victor answered, "and I'm prepared to accept the consequences. But I hope you'll look at what my mother has done and understand that I had no other choice." Don Benedetti looked at Catherine, then back at Victor. He considered for a moment, then stood up. "There will be no war," he said, his voice carrying authority. "Not because I forgive this insult, but because I don't stand with those who betray their own family. Catherine Carbone violated our most sacred rule. The alliance is dissolved, but there will be no war. However, Victor, you owe me a favor, and one day, I will collect it." He walked out of the room, Alexandra following behind him without looking at Victor even once. The other Dons left one by one, nodding to Victor with a newfound respect. They had witnessed a man willing to stand against his own mother, willing to sacrifice a powerful alliance for his true family. In their world, that was rare. At last, only Victor and Catherine remained in the room. She stared at her son with pure hatred in her eyes. "You've destroyed everything," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You've destroyed everything I built." "No, Mother," Victor replied as he turned and walked away. "You destroyed yourself." 1 week after the summit, the Dons gathered once again to deliver a final judgment on Catherine Carbone. This was not a meeting convened by Victor, but a collective decision of the council, because betraying one's own family to ally with an enemy was a crime that affected the entire underworld. Without a fitting punishment, others would believe they could do the same without consequence. Catherine was brought before the council, no longer wearing elegant silk dresses or precious pearl necklaces. She was dressed in simple black, her hair no longer pinned neatly but falling to her shoulders, silver strands clearly visible under the lights. For the first time in her life, Catherine Carbone looked like an ordinary old woman, stripped of power and authority. Victor sat at the far end of the table, looking at his mother with eyes completely devoid of emotion. He had cried all the tears he had, exhausted all his anger, and now there was only emptiness left. The woman standing before him had once been his mother, had once held him when he was a child, had taught him how to survive in this brutal world. But that same woman had stolen 5 years of his happiness, had threatened to kill the woman he loved, had sold out her own grandson to an enemy. Don Benedetti stood and read the council's verdict. Catherine Carbone, you have violated our most sacred rule. You betrayed your own blood and allied with an enemy to harm your own family. The council has decided to strip you of all power and status within the Carbone family. You will be exiled to a distant place, where you will live out the remainder of your days in solitude. You are forbidden from contacting anyone in the community and forbidden from returning to New York. If you violate this, the death sentence will be carried out immediately. Catherine stood there, her back still straight, her chin still lifted, but Victor saw her hands tremble slightly. She didn't beg or plead, because she knew it was useless. In their world, the council's judgment was absolute. You will regret this, Catherine said, her voice still cold as she faced exile. The Carbone family will collapse without me. Victor will destroy everything for an orphan girl and her bastard child. The Carbone family will remain strong. Victor stood and stepped forward to face his mother one last time. But not because of you. You taught me that family is everything, but you never understood what that truly means. Family isn't power, isn't prestige, isn't pure blood. Family is the people who love each other unconditionally and protect each other at any cost. Amelia and Ethan are my family. And you were never truly family. Catherine looked at her son, and for the first time Victor saw something flicker in her eyes. Not regret, not pain, but deep disappointment. She had gambled everything on controlling her son, and she had lost. I created you, she said, her voice like a weary sigh. I made you the most powerful mafia boss in this city, and this is how you repay me. You created a man who didn't know how to love, Victor replied. But Amelia and Ethan showed me there's another way to live. I won't become you, Mother. I won't sacrifice my family for power. That's the difference between us. He turned and walked away without looking back. Behind him, 2 guards escorted Catherine out of the room and into a waiting car. She would be taken to a small house in a remote rural area, hundreds of miles from New York, where she would live alone for the rest of her life. Victor drove back to the estate in silence, his mind empty. When he stepped through the door, Ethan ran to him and wrapped his arms around his legs. "Daddy's home," the boy shouted, his gray eyes shining. "Daddy, look at my drawing. There's Daddy, there's Mommy, there's me, and there's a big house too." Victor lifted his son into his arms and looked at the crooked drawing of 3 people standing in front of a house. He glanced toward Amelia, who stood in the kitchen doorway smiling at him. And Victor knew that even though he had lost a mother, he had found a real family. 3 months after Catherine was exiled, Victor's life had changed completely. He still ran the Carbone empire, but he no longer spent 18 hours a day consumed by work. He came home for dinner with Amelia and Ethan, read fairy tales to his son before bedtime, and woke up every morning to the sound of the boys' laughter echoing through the estate. Amelia had reopened her bakery, this time in a better location, fully equipped with everything Victor had quietly arranged. She refused to let him pay the rent, insisting that she would handle it through her own hard work. Victor loved her even more for that, for the pride and strength she had never lost, despite all the suffering she had endured. One autumn evening, when golden leaves covered the garden and Ethan was fast asleep in his room, Victor led Amelia out onto the balcony. He knelt before her, holding a red velvet box. Inside was a diamond ring, not the one from 5 years ago, but a new one, simpler, yet far more meaningful. 6 years ago, I asked you a question, but never had the chance to keep my promise, Victor said, his voice trembling slightly. Today, I want to ask again. Amelia, will you be my wife? Not because of alliances, not because of power, but because I love you. I've loved you since the day you spilled whiskey on my suit and looked at me as if I were just another stranger. I loved you through 5 years of separation, even when I tried to forget. And I'll love you until my last breath, Amelia cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. But she smiled. She nodded, and Victor slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking with happiness. They held each other under the moonlight, two people who had walked through hell to find their way back to one another. The wedding was held 1 month later at Father Thomas's small church, the place that had sheltered Amelia and Ethan during their darkest days. There were no hundreds of guests, no press, no display of excess. Only those closest to them were there. Marco and a few loyal men, Father Thomas, and a handful of friends Amelia had made over the years. Amelia wore a simple white wedding dress, her hair loose, no elaborate jewelry. But to Victor, she was more beautiful than anyone he had ever seen. Ethan wore a tiny suit, holding a velvet pillow with the wedding rings, walking solemnly like a grown man. When Father Thomas asked Ethan if he agreed to be a witness for Daddy and Mommy's wedding, the boy shouted, "I do," making the whole church laugh. Victor spoke his vows, his voice breaking. "I used to be a man who lived in darkness, who didn't believe in love, didn't believe in family, but you changed me. You and Ethan gave me a reason to become a better man. I swear to protect you, to love you, and to stay by your side forever." Amelia spoke her vows, tears rolling down her face. "You were once the storm that destroyed my life, but you were also the only shore I ever wanted to return to. I've waited for this moment for 6 years. I forgive you, Victor, and I swear to love you until my heart stops beating." They exchanged rings, kissed, and Ethan jumped up to hug them both, shouting, "Now we're a real family." 1 year after the wedding, their lives had changed entirely. Victor was still the head of the Carbone family, but he had gradually stepped away from the underworld, focusing on legitimate businesses. He wanted to build a clean future for Ethan, one where his son wouldn't have to live in the shadows the way he once had. Amelia continued running the bakery, now one of the most beloved shops in Brooklyn. She hired more staff, expanded the business, and still personally baked the pastries her customers loved. She didn't need Victor's money. She only needed him by her side. Ethan was now 5 years old, healthy and happy after his successful heart surgery. He went to kindergarten, had friends, and no longer drew pictures with an empty space beside Mommy. Now, every drawing showed 3 people, Daddy, Mommy, and Ethan, standing in front of a big house with a bright golden sun above it. One evening, as the family sat together in the living room, Ethan lay between his parents, asking for a bedtime story. Victor told a story about a prince who lost his princess and his little son, but eventually found them again and lived happily ever after. "Daddy, that story is like us," Ethan said, his eyes already drooping with sleep. "That's right, my son," Victor kissed his forehead. "Just like us." When Ethan fell asleep, Victor and Amelia sat by the window, looking out at the city of New York glowing in the night. "Do you regret it?" Amelia asked. "Everything you gave up." Victor looked at his wife and smiled. "I gave up a powerful alliance. I gave up my mother's approval. I gave up a lavish wedding. But look at what I gained. The bravest woman I've ever known. A wonderful son. A real family. That's the best deal of my life." Amelia rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat in silence, watching the city lights shimmer. Two people from different worlds, once torn apart by 5 years of pain and lies, had finally found happiness together. And somewhere in the bedroom, a 5-year-old boy slept peacefully, smiling in his dreams of the family he had prayed for during 4 long years. This story reminds us that family isn't about power or status, but about the people who love one another unconditionally. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is stand up to protect the ones we love, even if it means facing the whole world. And it's never too late to begin again, to forgive, to start a new life. If you've stayed with us until this moment, please take a second to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more touching stories like this. Please like and share this video with the people you love to spread the message of love and family. We'd love to know how you felt about Victor and Amelia's story. Have you ever had to make difficult choices for your family? Do you believe love can overcome every barrier? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We truly listen to every feeling that comes from your heart. We wish everyone watching this video good health, joy, and peace in every day ahead. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.